Greetings, Lawmasters. Tonight our chronicle covers a threat that casts a shadow longer than the history of the Empire itself. We are looking up, shielding our eyes against the sun, watching for that sudden, terrifying silhouette that turns a peaceful walk through the hold into a fight for survival. We're talking about the Dovah, the dragons, the ancient rulers of Nirn who don't just breathe fire, they speak reality into existence. Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive a trip to Cold Harbour or a trek up High Hrothgar without some serious enchanted gear, and you certainly wouldn't last 5 seconds against a legendary dragon while wearing nothing but fur armour and holding a rusty iron dagger. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and drop a comment letting me know where in the world you are and what time it is. I always love seeing the global campfire we're building. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. To understand the dragons, you have to throw away the standard biology textbook. When we think of monsters in Tamriel, trolls, Chorus, even giants, we're thinking of flesh and blood, creatures born from the mud and the Magnigi's chaotic influence on the world. But dragons are fundamentally different. They are not merely big lizards with wings, they are metaphysical anomalies. They are quite literally children of the time god. In the pantheon of the divines, Akatosh is the dragon god of time. He is the chief deity, the one who legitimized the covenant with the Alessian Empire, the one whose avatar Martin Septim summoned to banish Mehrunes Dagon. But the relationship between Akatosh and the dragons we fight in Skyrim is complex, ancient, and steeped in divine blood. The dragons refer to Akatosh as Bormahu, which translates simply to our father. This isn't a biological designation in the way you or I would understand it. It is an ontological one. Imagine time not as a river, but as a colossal, crystalline entity. When time began, or perhaps when it was shattered during the chaotic dawn era, shards of that divine concept broke off and gained sentience. Those shards are the dragons. They are fragments of the Akatusk, the original time spirit. This is why dragons are ageless. They don't just live for a long time. They are interwoven with the fabric of time itself. They were there when the world was grey and formless, and they are intended to be there when it ends. A dragon does not age, does not wither, and, under normal circumstances, does not die. This brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of their existence, their inherent nature to dominate. In the game, Paarthurnax poses a very famous philosophical question to the Dragonborn. What is better, to be born good, or to overcome your evil nature through great effort? This implies that for a dragon, evil, or specifically the drive to conquer, is the default setting. It isn't a choice they make out of malice or political ambition. It is their state of being. This drive is known as the will to power, or the urge to dominate. Because they are shards of the chief deity, the ultimate authority of the Mundus, they intuitively feel that all creation is beneath them. They are the apex. To a dragon, ruling over mortals is as natural as breathing is to us. It's not arrogance, exactly. It's a cosmic fact from their perspective. They look at a human or an elf the way you might look at an ant. You don't hate the ant, but you certainly don't recognize its sovereignty over your kitchen. You remove it, or you crush it, because you are the higher being. Now, there is a core in-game fact that every player encounters, usually within the first few hours of Skyrim. The book The Dragon War explains that in the ancient Merethic era, dragons ruled over men as gods. This wasn't a hidden conspiracy. It was the open religious structure of the world. The dragons weren't just monsters raiding villages. They were the administration. They were the priesthood's deities. This hierarchy was absolute because in the dragon's mind, truth and power are the same thing. If you are stronger, you are right. This is why their debates are actual battles. When dragons argue, they are shouting at each other, projecting their will onto reality. The one whose voice is stronger literally proves their truth is superior. There is no distinction between I am right and I can burn you to ash. However, the community has spent years debating the nuances of this Shard of Akatosh theory. There is a prevalent fan theory, often discussed in deep lore threads, involving the Marokati Selectives, a sect of fanatical priests from the First Era. The theory suggests that these priests, in an attempt to exorcise the elven aspects from Akatosh to make him a purely human god, danced on the adamantine tower and actually broke the time dragon. Some lore enthusiasts argue that this Middle Dawn dragon break is what scattered the dragons across time or corrupted their nature, turning them from divine custodians into tyrants. It's a dense metaphysical debate. Did the dragons always exist as they are? Or are they the result of a schizophrenic break in the mind of the god of time? While the game simplifies this by just calling them children, the implications are terrifying. If they are shards of Akatosh, then fighting them is fighting a piece of divinity. It explains why normal weapons barely scratch them. You're trying to cut time with a steel sword. It's futile without the right magic or the blessing of the Dragonborn, who is essentially a mortal vessel with a dragon's soul, another shard of the same mirror, looking back at itself. There is also a significant amount of confusion regarding the identity of Alduin specifically. Throughout Skyrim, you hear conflicting reports. Some Nords shout, "Akatosh, save us," while others, particularly the ancient texts, seem to conflate Alduin with Akatosh. This is known as the Alduin-Akatosh dichotomy. In the ancient Nordic pantheon, there wasn't really a benevolent Akatosh figure. There was only Alduin, the World-Eater. He was the end of times, a force of nature to be feared, not worshipped for comfort. Imperial scholars later tried to separate the two, claiming Alduin is just the firstborn son, a distinct entity from the benevolent time dragon worshipped in Cyrodiil. But the obscure lore, the stuff you find in developer texts like the 7 Fights of the Aldudega, hints that the Nords might have been right in their own way. Alduin is an aspect of Akatosh, specifically the aspect that ends things. Time has a beginning and it must have an end. Alduin is that end. He isn't just a big dragon, he is the cosmic function of stop. When a dragon looks at you, they see something ephemeral, a jaw, a mortal. The word itself carries a connotation of weakness, of fleeting existence. This is why their arrogance is so profound. They know they were here before the mountains settled, and they believe they will be here after the mountains crumble. Their domination is an expression of their permanence. To be a dragon is to be eternal, and to be eternal is to rule over everything that is temporary. This metaphysical weight is heavy. It presses down on the soul of Nirn. When you see a dragon perched on a word wall, you aren't just seeing a beast guarding treasure. You're seeing a fragment of the primordial universe asserting its dominance over the land. They are drawn to these word walls because the words are power, and power is their sustenance. They don't just speak the language, they are the language. We also have to touch on the visuals of their birth, or rather the lack thereof. You never see a baby dragon in Skyrim. You never find a nest of eggs that hatch into little lizardlings. There are no teenage dragons going through a rebellion phase. This reinforces their nature as spirits clad in reptilian skin. They simply appear, or they wake up. In the lore, their numbers are finite. No new dragons are being made. Akatosh isn't shedding any more scales. This adds a tragic, desperate element to their war against mankind. Every dragon that dies is a permanent subtraction from the universe. They are an endangered species of gods, fighting to reclaim a world that has moved on without them, a world that has forgotten the fear of the ticking clock. Even their names reflect this divine origin. A dragon's name is always 3 words of power: Paarthurnax, ambition, overlord, cruelty. Odaviing, snow, hunter, wing. Their identity is a shout. To speak a dragon's name is, in a minor way, to cast a spell. This is why the Greybeards are so cautious with their words. They understand that for the children of the time god, speech is an act of creation and destruction. When a dragon introduces himself, he is defining his existence in the tonal architecture of the world. So as we watch that silhouette glide over the mountains of the Reach, remember what it is. It isn't an animal hunting for food. It is a timeless, immortal shard of a fractured god, driven by an unchangeable compulsion to place its claw on the neck of the world and say, "I am." They are the echoes of the dawn, screaming across the sky, refusing to fade into the night, and their biological immortality, the very mechanism that keeps them in the sky, is where things get even stranger. Because if they don't breed, and they don't age, how exactly does their physiology function? That, my friends, is a puzzle of scales and stone we need to unravel next. If you were to somehow wrangle a dragon, strap it to a giant operating table, and conduct an autopsy, you would find organs that look vaguely familiar. They have hearts, they have lungs, they bleed when you cut them. But if you look closer, the biology of a dragon is less about cellular respiration and more about magical sustainment. These creatures are, for lack of a better term, biological time machines. Let's start with the most glaring biological anomaly. Dragons do not breed. There are no female dragons. In fact, the concept of gender doesn't really apply to them in the biological sense. They are all sons of Akatosh, referred to with masculine pronouns, but they lack the equipment or the drive to reproduce. This is a massive deviation from every other living thing on Nirn. Even the Daedra, who are spirits, can be born or formed from the chaotic creation of oblivion, and they often assume genders. But dragons are static. Their population was fixed at the moment of their creation. This lack of reproduction means there is no evolution for dragons. A wolf in Skyrim today might be faster or stronger than a wolf from the First Era because of natural selection. But a dragon in the Fourth Era is exactly the same as he was in the Merethic Era. They do not adapt, they endure. Their biology is locked in a state of stasis. This is likely why they are so hard to kill. Their cells, if they even have cells in the traditional sense, don't seem to undergo senescence. They don't get cancer. They don't get arthritis. They are biologically perfect from the moment they exist until the moment a Dragonborn absorbs their soul. Now consider their metabolism. Dragons are huge. A creature that size flying through the air would require an immense amount of caloric intake. We see them snatching up goats and occasionally roasting a guard or two, but let's be real, a few goats aren't going to power a 5-ton reptile that breathes literal fire. The energy density required for their flight and their breath attacks violates the laws of thermodynamics. The leading theory supported by in-game lore is that dragons feed on something more than just meat. They feed on power, and they feed on the essence of the world. Remember, they are magical beings. Their bodies are saturated with magicka. It's highly probable that they absorb background magic from the environment to sustain their massive forms. This might explain why they're often found at word walls or ancient ruins, places where magicka pools or where the veil between Mundus and the Aetherius is thin. The goat is just a snack. The real meal is the magical radiation of the land itself. A core in-game fact supports this idea of resilience. Dragon scales and dragon bones are the hardest materials known to Tamrielic smithing. To work with them, you need a level of skill that surpasses even the mastery of ebony or daedric crafting. In Skyrim, dragon plate and dragon scale armour represent the pinnacle of protection. But think about what that implies biologically. Their bones aren't just calcium. They're likely reinforced with some kind of metaphysical crystal structure that resists time and decay. You can find dragon burial mounds that have been undisturbed for thousands of years. The dragon inside isn't a skeleton. He's a desiccated corpse, fully intact, just waiting for a shout to reignite his life functions. They don't rot. Bacteria and worms seem to have no effect on dragon flesh. It's as if their bodies are simply paused rather than dead. This leads us to an obscure lore tidbit regarding their death. In the lore, particularly from the Atlas of Dragons, we learn that even when a dragon is killed by normal means, stabbed to death by the Dragonguard for instance, it isn't truly gone. Its soul remains with the bones. The consciousness lingers in a dormant state. This is terrifying if you think about it. The dragon you just slew near Whiterun. If you aren't the Dragonborn, you didn't kill it. You just knocked it unconscious for a few centuries. It is trapped in its own corpse, aware, waiting. It's a form of biological imprisonment, not release. There's a fascinating discussion in the community about the anatomy of the dragon's breath weapon, the Thu'um. Biologically, how does a throat produce fire, frost, or pure concussive force? It's not a chemical gland like a bombardier beetle. It's not a sack of flammable gas. The shout is tonal magic projected through the vocal cords. However, the dragon's throat must be incredibly reinforced to withstand the output of that energy. If a human tried to shout like a dragon without the years of greybeard training, or the Dragonborn's inherent gift, they would likely tear their throat apart. The dragon's vocal apparatus is its primary weapon, and its primary organ of interaction with the world. Their biology is centered around the voice. Their neck muscles, their lung capacity, their jaw structure, it's all evolved, or designed, to amplify sound. One of the lighter, slightly grim jokes among the Nord hunters involves the sheer heat of a dragon. There's a line you might hear in windswept taverns. A dragon's blood is so hot it'll cook the sword you stab it with. While an exaggeration, It touches on the intense internal temperature these creatures must maintain. They live on the highest peaks, often in blinding snowstorms, like Paarthurnax at the throat of the world, yet they never seem cold. They don't hibernate, they are furnaces of divine energy. We also have to talk about their eyes. Dragon eyes are distinct, reptilian vertical slits, glowing with an inner light. But they perceive the world differently. Because they are creatures of time, it is speculated that they see the flow of time differently than mortals. They might perceive the past, present and future as a singular, overlapping landscape. This is hinted at by Paarthurnax when he struggles to focus on the present moment with the Dragonborn, constantly drifting into meditations on the Kell, the Elder Scrolls, and the nature of destiny. To a dragon, your movement might look like a long smear of action stretching back to your birth. Their biology is hardwired for 4D perception in a 3D world. Let's acknowledge a fan theory that has gained traction. The idea that dragons are actually organic machines, or golems of Akatosh. This aligns with the visual of Alduin resurrecting dragons. The shout Slentid Vo translates to flesh time undo. He's literally reversing time on their rotting bodies to restore them to their factory settings. If they were purely biological, reversing time on a skeleton wouldn't necessarily reattach the nerves and restart the brain so perfectly. But if they are constructs, metaphysical constructs of bone and scale, then it makes sense. They are being rebooted. There is also the matter of dragonlings. Veteran players of Daggerfall will remember an enemy called a dragonling. These were smaller, dragon-like creatures. For years, fans debated if these were young dragons. However, Skyrim and subsequent lore clarifications have retconned or explained this away. Dragonlings are now considered a separate species, merely lizards that look like dragons, similar to how a seahorse isn't a horse. True dragons have no infancy. This reinforces the biology of the eternal concept. They are immutable. The sheer durability of a dragon is also worth noting in a combat sense. In the game, they crash land, carving huge trenches into the earth, and then get up and bite you. The kinetic energy of a 10-ton beast hitting the ground at 60 miles per hour should shatter every bone in its body. But they treat it like a stumble. Their connective tissues, their scales, their very structure is reinforced by their divine nature. They are built to crash. They are built to wage war on a geological scale. Finally, consider the blood of the dragon. This isn't just a poetic title for the Septim Emperors. Dragon blood has unique alchemical properties. It is potent, volatile, and deeply magical. In Oblivion, the blood of a dragon, via the Amulet of Kings and Martin Septim, is the key to sealing the barriers between worlds. This suggests that dragon biology acts as a metaphysical anchor. They weigh reality down, they keep the mundus stable, or in Alduin's case, they destabilize it. Their very existence in the biological ecosystem of Nirn serves a function of cosmic regulation. So, we have a creature that doesn't breed, doesn't age, eats magic, sees time, and is made of materials that defy the capabilities of mortal smiths. They are biology turned up to 11, stripped of the weaknesses of the flesh, and infused with the durability of stone and starlight. But the most terrifying part of a dragon isn't its claws, or its teeth, or even its near indestructible hide. It is the sound it makes. Because when a dragon speaks, the universe doesn't. Just listen. It obeys. And that brings us to the most potent weapon in their arsenal, the very architecture of their soul, the Thu'um. To understand the Thu'um, you have to stop thinking like a mage and start thinking like a musician, or perhaps a coder. When a wizard in the College of Winterhold cast a fireball, they are pulling raw magicka from Aetherius through the sun, shaping it with their mind and throwing it. It's a transaction. They pay a cost and the universe provides a spell. But the Thu'um, the voice, is fundamentally different. It doesn't ask the universe for permission, it gives the universe orders. It is tonal architecture in its rawest, most biological form. The concept of tonal architecture asserts that the entire orbis, the universe, the planes of oblivion, Nirn itself, is essentially a song. The music of the spheres isn't just a poetic metaphor in the Elder Scrolls, it is literal. Reality is composed of tones, frequencies, and vibrations. When the Dwemer, the Deep Elves, manipulated reality, they used tonal tools, hammers and tuning forks, to strike the earth bones and reshape the laws of physics. They hacked the song with machines. Dragons, however, hack the song with their lungs. When a dragon shouts, they are projecting their vital essence, their animus, into a specific frequency that overrides the current state of reality. Think of it like a heated argument. The universe says, gravity works like this. The dragon shouts and effectively says, I disagree. And because the dragon's will is stronger, the universe concedes. Gravity stops working, or the air turns into fire, or time slows down. This is why the dragons call it the Thu'um, or the storm voice. It is a chaotic disruption of the standard melody of existence. This brings us to a core in-game fact that players learn very quickly, usually after trudging up the 7,000 steps. The Greybeards teach you that learning a word of power isn't just about memorization. You can't just read the word Yol, fire, in a dictionary and expect to breathe flame. To shout, you must take the concept of fire into your very being. You must understand its heat, its hunger, its destructive nature. You must become the fire for a split second. This is why the Dragonborn absorbs dragon souls to unlock shouts. You aren't just spending currency, you're absorbing the knowledge and experience of a dead immortal who understood fire intimately for thousands of years. You're downloading their understanding so you don't have to meditate on a candle for decades like the Greybeards do. The philosophy behind this projection of will is intense. It implies that dragons are solipsistic by nature. To shout reality into a new shape, you must believe, with absolute certainty, that your version of reality is the correct one. This is why dragon battles are described as debates. It sounds like a joke, two giant lizards yelling at each other, but it is quite literal. When two dragons fight, they are arguing over whose truth is stronger. If Odahviing shouts Yoltor Shul at you, he is asserting the truth that the air here is fire. If you shout back or if you use a ward, you are presenting a counter-argument. No, the air is stable. The loser of the debate is the one who burns. It's a battle of egos as much as it is a battle of magical force. This connection to tonal architecture links the dragons to some of the most obscure and powerful metaphysics in the lore. Tonal magic is rare. Aside from the dragons and the Dwemer, the only other group known to use a similar form of power were the Redguard sword singers of Yakuda. They practiced the Shi-Hai, or spirit sword, where they would sing a blade into existence from their own soul. It's the same principle, internal will projected as external reality. This puts the dragons in a category of power far above vampires or liches. A lich bends the rules, a dragon rewrites the rulebook. Now, let's look at an obscure lore tidbit that often goes unnoticed. In the text, Children of the Sky, it is mentioned that the Nords believe Kine, the widow of Shor and the goddess of the storm, breathed the Nords into existence at the throat of the world. The voice is considered her gift. But what's fascinating is the implication that the tongues, the mortal users of the Thu'um, were actually acting as a sort of priesthood. The voice wasn't originally a weapon of war for humans. It was a way to worship the gods by speaking their language. It was only during the Dragon War that it was weaponized. This creates a tragic irony. The Nords used the sacred language of creation to destroy their oppressors. They took the song of creation and turned it into a scream of war. This weaponization leads to a fascinating fan theory regarding the cooldown mechanic we see in the game. In Skyrim, you shout, and then your compass flashes blue, and you can't shout again for a few seconds or minutes. Gameplay-wise, this is obviously for balance so you don't stunlock every boss. But lore-wise, fans debate what this cooldown represents. Some argue it's the physical toll on the vocal cords, that shouting strains the throat to the point of rupture if not rested. But the more metaphysical theory suggests that the cooldown is the time required for the earth bones to heal. The theory posits that when you shout, you are tearing a hole in the fabric of the song, you are creating a dissonance. The universe is elastic, it snaps back. The cooldown is the universe resisting your will, reasserting the laws of physics. If you shouted continuously without pause, you might unravel the local reality entirely, causing a dragon break or a localized collapse of time and space. The Greybeards hint at this when they warn that the voice is dangerous not just to enemies, but to the world itself. When they whisper Dovahkiin, the mountain shakes. If they spoke loudly, they could accidentally shout the world apart. The cooldown is a safety valve, either imposed by Akatosh or by the limits of the mortal soul's ability to contradict reality. We also have to appreciate the sheer variety of the Thu'um. It's not just destruction. Kine's peace calms animals, clear skies disperses weather, or a whisper detects life. These shouts reinforce the idea that the voice is about control over all aspects of nature, not just combat. A dragon doesn't just dominate lesser beings, he dominates the weather, the animals, and the light itself. When you use clear skies, you are telling the clouds to leave, and they are terrified enough to obey. It's an assertion of authority over the atmosphere. The most controversial shout in the lore, and one we will touch on later in detail, is Dragonrend. But even without that, the standard dragon arsenal is terrifying. Consider Unrelenting Force, the famous Fusrodar. It translates to force, balance, push. It isn't a wind blast. It is the application of pure kinetic energy without a physical source. It's like being hit by a train that doesn't exist. The dragon creates the effect of the impact without the cause. That is the essence of tonal architecture, skipping the cause to get straight to the effect. There is a dark side to this power, of course. Using the voice changes you. The Greybeards speak of the way of the voice as a path of pacifism and worship, likely because they know that using the voice for violence is addictive. It feeds the dragon part of the soul, the urge to dominate. We see this in Ulfric's Stormcloak. He used the voice to kill the High King, Torrig. Whether he shouted him to pieces or just knocked him down and stabbed him is a matter of political debate in solitude, but the act itself was a violation of the Greybeards' teachings. Ulfric used a tool of divine worship for a political assassination. It shows that the power of the Thu'um is neutral. It is the intent of the speaker that colours the song. So when a dragon opens its maw, it isn't just exhaling. It is engaging in a complex metaphysical process of imposing its ego upon the world. It is a reality warper, a living tuning fork vibrating at a frequency that shatters stone and boils blood. They are the architects of their own truth, and for thousands of years their truth was that humanity was nothing more than cattle. To break that truth, mankind would need to learn to sing a different song, a song of rebellion. And that brings us to the rise of the dragon cult, the organization that translated the dragon's divine will into human tyranny. Now that we understand the metaphysical arsenal of the dragons, we need to look at how they managed to organize a society around themselves. You see, dragons are apex predators, and like many apex predators, think lions or house cats, they are fundamentally lazy when it comes to the mundane details of administration. A dragon wants to dominate, yes, but he doesn't want to count bushels of wheat or settle property disputes between farmers. He wants to perch on a mountain, contemplate the nature of time, and occasionally burn a rival. To run a civilization, they needed thumbs, they needed bureaucrats, they needed the dragon cult. The origins of this cult go back much further than the stone temples of Skyrim. They stretch across the Sea of Ghosts to the frozen continent of Atmora. In the ancient days, before the great migration of Ysgramor and his 500 companions, the Atmorans practiced a form of totem worship. They revered the animals of the forest, the hawk, the wolf, the snake, the moth, the owl, the whale, the bear, the fox, and the dragon. At this stage, the dragon was simply the head of the pantheon, the foremost among equals. It wasn't necessarily a tyranny of fire and blood yet. It was a spiritual hierarchy that made sense in a brutal frozen world. The dragon totem represented time, stability, and raw power. If you were living in a land where the frost could freeze the blood in your veins in seconds, worshipping the thing that breathed fire seemed like a pretty solid survival strategy. When the Atmorans migrated to Tamriel, fleeing the freezing of the world in the late Merethic era, they brought this religious structure with them. But something changed during the crossing or shortly after the settlement of Skyrim. The worship of the animal totems began to shift. The dragon totem began to cannibalize the importance of the others. The temples dedicated to the hawk, kine, or the bear, tsun, became secondary to the massive monolithic structures dedicated to the dragons. The dragon cult emerged not just as a religion, but as the government. Here is where the genius and the evil of the system becomes apparent. The dragons established a theocracy where they were the absentee landlords, and the dragon priests were the property managers. The priests were powerful mages, granted a sliver of the dragon's power in exchange for absolute obedience and the management of the mortal population. This was the iron-fisted rule we read about in the lore. It was a protection racket on a continental scale. The dragons kept the other monsters at bay, the giants, the goblins, the chaotic forces of the wild, and in return, humanity gave them tribute, labour, and absolute submission. The centre of this power was Bromjunar. You know this place. You've been there, probably to retrieve the staff of Magnus or to dump a bunch of wooden masks onto a stone bust. Today, we call it Labyrinthian. But in the Merethic era, Bromjanar was the capital of Skyrim. It was the Vatican city of the dragon cult. It was a sprawling metropolis of stone and magic where the highest-ranking dragon priests met to legislate the lives of the Nords. It's hard to imagine now, looking at the ruins and the trolls wandering the courtyards, but that place was once the gleaming heart of human civilization in the north. We have to talk about the infrastructure they built because it leads to a core in-game fact that everyone encounters, but few stop to really question. The dragon claws and the puzzle doors. You've done this 100 times. You find a golden claw, you look at the palm, you see bear, moth, owl, you rotate the rings, and the door opens. It seems like a terrible security system. If the key has the password written on it, what's the point? But the death of a wanderer and notes from Aranea Einith suggest a chilling reality. These doors weren't built to keep people out, they were built to keep the Draugr in. The dragon cult knew that their dead were restless. They knew that the ancient Nords, buried with their weapons and infused with the magic of the cult, might wake up. The puzzle doors are designed so that the living, who have the complex cognitive function to use a key and read a code, can enter to pay respects or offer tribute. But a mindless Draugr or a simple grave robber without the claw would be trapped. It was a containment protocol for their own necromantic workforce. This brings us to the daily life under the cult. It wasn't all torture and executions, at least not initially. It was order. The dragon priests maintained peace. They built the roads. They organized the agriculture. For a time, it worked. But absolute power corrupts, and power derived from domination-obsessed lizards corrupts absolutely. The priests began to emulate their masters. They became cruel. They demanded more tribute. The protection tax became unbearable. The transition from guardians to tyrants was slow, insidious, and absolute. There is an obscure lore tidbit found in the text The Dragon War regarding the specific nature of the dragon priests' rewards. We often think they served out of fear, but the dragons offered something more intoxicating: longevity. The masks given to the high priests, Hevnorak, Croesus, Volsung, and the rest, were powerful enchanted artifacts, yes, but the priests themselves became leeches. They achieved a form of immortality that mimicked the dragons. They didn't die, they withered into eternal undeath. This suggests the dragons shared the secrets of soul preservation with their top lieutenants. It was a pyramid scheme of immortality. The dragons live forever naturally. The priests live forever necromantically. The commoners live short, brutal lives to support the top two tiers. This leads to a very popular and somewhat disturbing fan theory about the Draugr. Why are the tombs of Skyrim filled with thousands of walking corpses? The standard explanation is that they are cursed to guard the tombs. But the Draugr battery theory suggests something darker. Notice how the dragon priests in the game often rise from a sarcophagus surrounded by other lesser Draugr, and notice how the priests often use drain life spells. The theory posits that the Draugr are not just guards, they are batteries. The followers of the cult willingly, or unwillingly, sacrificed themselves to be buried alive or ritually killed so that their souls could slowly leak energy into the dragon priest over thousands of years, keeping the priest alive in their slumber. The entire Nord burial custom of that era was a massive industrial energy harvesting operation to sustain the Lich Lords. It explains why the Draugr maintain the tombs. You see them sweeping, lighting candles, waiting. They aren't zombies in the Resident Evil sense, mindlessly looking for brains. They are maintenance workers. They are the spectral janitors of the cult, keeping the infrastructure ready for the day the dragons return to reclaim their capital. It adds a layer of tragedy to every Draugr you cut down. That was a person who likely believed they were serving a divine purpose, promised eternal service in exchange for, well, we aren't sure what they were promised, but they probably didn't read the fine print. The architecture of the cult also reflects their psychology. Everything is monumental, massive stone blocks, deep subterranean complexes, high arches. It is architecture designed to make the human feel small. When you walk into a Nordic ruin, you feel the weight of the stone above you. That is intentional. It is the architectural equivalent of the dragon's will to power. It suppresses the ego of the observer. You are meant to feel like an ant in the colony. But even within this iron-fisted system, there were cracks. The cult wasn't a monolith. We know from the lore surrounding the Mars Conoric, the warlord, that there was a need for a leader among the priests, someone to keep the others in line. The existence of a warlord mask implies internal conflict. The priests likely fought each other for the dragon's favour. It was a cutthroat corporate ladder where the promotion came with a mask and the severance package was incineration. We also have to consider the role of the voice in this societal structure. Initially, only the dragons could shout. Then they taught the priests. This was a massive concession. By teaching the priests the Thu'um, the dragons were sharing the keys to reality. It shows how much they relied on these human enforcers. A dragon priest with the voice was effectively a demigod to the common peasant. Imagine a tax collector who can shout you off a cliff. Resistance wasn't just illegal, it was physically impossible for the average Nord. However, this centralization of power was also their undoing. By concentrating so much authority in Bromjunar and the major temples, and by making the regime so brutally oppressive, they created a pressure cooker. The Nords are a hardy people. They can endure the cold, the wolves, and the hunger. But they have a breaking point regarding their freedom. The dragons, in their arrogance, didn't understand the human spirit. They looked at humans and seen short-lived, soft-skinned cattle. They didn't see the capacity for generational rage. So the stage was set. You had a continent-spanning empire of stone and ice, ruled by immortal lizards and their undead sorcerer kings. The common people were ground into the dust, their souls harvested, their labour exploited. It seemed like a regime that would last until the end of time, which, given the rulers were shards of the time god, seemed appropriate. But the dragons made a mistake. They forgot that even cattle have horns, and they didn't count on the intervention of the very goddess they had sidelined. The tyranny of the masks was absolute, but the winds of change were starting to blow from the throat of the world. If the dragon cult was the machine that ground humanity down, the dragon priests were the gears that crushed the bones. But these weren't nameless functionaries. The cult was a cult of personality, or rather, a cult of personas. To rise to the highest echelons of power, a priest had to shed their humanity quite literally. This transformation was symbolized and enforced by the masks. In Skyrim, we treat these masks as high-tier loot. We kill a floating lich, grab the shiny object from the ash pile and check the stats. Oh, cool, 20% better archery. But context is everything. To an ancient Nord, seeing one of these masks emerging from the mist wasn't an opportunity for loot. It was a death sentence. The masks were faceplates of absolute authority. They were designed to strip the wearer of their individuality and replace it with a single, terrifying concept. Take Paarthurnax, for example. You encounter him in Thu'um, and his story is a perfect case study in the specific cruelty of the priesthood. Paarthurnax didn't just want to rule, he wanted to become a god. In the lore found within his tomb, we learn that he spent his life draining the blood from his own subjects, and eventually himself into vessels, planning to transfuse this stored power back into his lich form upon resurrection. He was a magical hemomancer who viewed the blood of his people as a literal liquid currency to buy his own divinity. This wasn't just evil, it was industrial-scale parasitism. The fear he inspired was so great that even in death, his own ghost Valdar had to stay behind to keep the seal on his tomb, knowing that if Paarthurnax ever woke up fully, the horror would begin all over again. Then there is Ottar the Mad. He ruled Ragnvald with such insanity that two Nordic heroes, Sarek and Torsten, had to be appointed specifically to guard his tomb forever. The key here is that Ottar wasn't just a tyrant, he was mad. The dragons didn't care about the mental stability of their middle managers as long as the tribute flowed. If a priest wanted to torture the populace for sport or conduct bizarre experiments on the nature of pain, the dragons turned a blind eye. This permissiveness created a hierarchy where cruelty was a competitive advantage. The more ruthless you were, the more likely you were to receive a mask. A core in-game fact that every player notices is the sheer diversity of the mask's enchantments. This tells us about the specialization of the terror. Crosis, found at Sheerpoint, boosts alchemy, archery and lockpicking. He was likely an assassin priest, a hunter of dissidents who operated in the shadows. Volsung, found at Volskygge, grants water breathing and better barter prices. He was the diplomat, the merchant lord who squeezed every septim out of the economy and could perhaps drag dissenters into the freezing depths of the Sea of Ghosts. These weren't just wizards, they were a cabinet of ministers, each overseeing a different aspect of the oppression. One of the most chilling aspects of the masks is the material. They are made of unknown metals, likely distinct alloys forged in dragonfire. But there is an obscure lore tidbit, or perhaps a strong implication from the game files and texture analysis, that the masks might bond to the face of the wearer. When you kill a dragon priest, the mask is the only thing left. The body turns to dust, the robes rot, but the mask remains pristine. It suggests that the mask consumes the wearer. The man who puts it on eventually ceases to exist, only the function remains. You don't wear the mask of Nakreen, vengeance, you become vengeance. This loss of self leads to a fascinating fan theory regarding the wooden mask found at Labyrinthian. You put it on inside the ruined dome, and you're transported back in time to when the sanctuary was whole. Fans debate, is this time travel or is it a memory? The theory suggests that the wooden mask is a key to the past, a device used by the priests to commune across time, perhaps to consult with their predecessors, or even the dragons in different eras. It implies the cult had technology that could bypass the linear flow of time, further solidifying their grip. If you can hide your secrets in the past, no rebel can ever find them. We must also discuss the traitor masks, or the ones that imply a fracture in the system. The Dragonborn DLC introduced us to the acolytes of Mirak, Azidal, Dukan, and Zakrizos. Azidal is particularly tragic. His name means bitter destroyer. In the lore, he was a master enchanter, a genius human who learned from the elves and then turned against them. He sought the power of the dragons not out of subservience, but out of a desire for revenge and knowledge. His descent into madness, driven by the reading of the Black Books and the influence of Hermaeus Mora, shows that the dragon cult wasn't just a political entity, it was a gateway to eldritch horrors. The priests were often dabbling in forces that even the dragons might have been wary of. The cruelty of the masks culminated in their relationship with the afterlife. Nakreen guards the portal to Sovngarde at Skuldafn. This is the ultimate tyranny. The dragon cult didn't just want to own your life, they wanted to own your death. By placing a high-ranking priest at the literal gate to heaven, they were effectively holding the Nord souls hostage. Obey us, or we will block your entry to the Hall of Valor. Imagine the psychological weight of that. You fight and die, hoping for rest, only to find a floating lich with a lightning staff standing between you and your ancestors. It was a blockade of salvation. And then there is the mystery of the final mask, Conaric, the warlord. You only get this by collecting all the others. The mask has tusks. It looks more bestial than the rest. The enchantment heals you when you are near death and can summon a spectral dragon priest to fight for you. Who was Conaric? The game never tells us. Was he the supreme leader, a title passed around, or is Conaric a failsafe, a break glass in case of emergency golem created by the other masks? Some lore enthusiasts believe Conaric wasn't a person, but a suit of armour designed for the ultimate champion of the cult, perhaps meant for a corrupted Dragonborn. The fact that the mask has a chance to summon a spectral ally implies that the wearer is never alone. The cult is always with them. It represents the collective power of the priesthood focused into a single point. It is the physical manifestation of the cult's survival instinct. The reign of the masks was characterized by a specific type of magical dominance that severed the Nord's connection to their old totem gods. They replaced the worship of the hawk and the bear with the fear of the face. The priests were the visible avatars of the invisible dragon overlords. A dragon might fly overhead once a month, but the priest was there every day, watching, judging, taking. This suppression of the spirit is what made the atmosphere in the Merethic era so suffocating. It wasn't just physical slavery, it was spiritual suffocation. The Nords are a loud, boisterous people. They love to sing, to boast, to shout. The dragon cult silenced them. The only ones allowed to shout were the dragons and their masked puppets. To speak up was to die. The silence of the snow was matched by the silence of the people. But you can only compress a people for so long before they explode. The masks were terrifying, yes, the magic was overwhelming. But the Nords had something the priests had forgotten: the favour of the widow. While Akatosh's children ruled the sky, Shor's widow Kine was watching the mountains, and she was about to intervene in a way that would shatter the masks forever. The tyranny was strong, but the storm was coming, and the storm has a name. When you play Skyrim, you hear the name Kine thrown around by hunters and old women in Whiterun, often used interchangeably with Kinnereth. But to the ancient Nords, Kine wasn't just a polite goddess of nature who made the flowers bloom. She was the warrior wife of Shor. She was the storm, and most importantly, she was the mother of men. While Akatosh, or at least the Alduin aspect of him, was busy enslaving humanity, Kine was the one looking down and sharpening her knife. The turning point of the entire Dragon War pivots on a single divine intervention, an event known as Kine's Gift. The legend goes that Kine, pitying the suffering of her human children, instructed Paarthurnax to teach the Nords the Thu'um. Now, this is the sanitized Sunday school version of the story. The reality, as hinted at in the deeper lore, was likely much more desperate and violent. This wasn't a gift given in peacetime, it was an arms shipment smuggled into a war zone. Kine didn't just give them a weapon, she gave them the dragon's own voice. Philosophically, this is profound. She allowed mortals to participate in the tonal architecture of the universe. By granting them the ability to shout, she elevated humanity from cattle to rivals. It was a divine leveling of the playing field. The Nords didn't just learn to fight, they learned to speak with the authority of gods. But Kine needed a delivery system. She couldn't just descend and hold a seminar, she needed an insider, she needed a dragon. Enter Paarthurnax. We know him as the gentle old monk on the mountain, the leader of the Greybeards, but in the Merethic era, Paarthurnax was the lieutenant of Alduin. His name, ambition, overlord, cruelty, wasn't ironic. He was a monster. He had burned villages, enslaved thousands, and served as the right hand of the World-Eater. So, why the betrayal? This is one of the most debated topics in the community. Why would the second in command of the winning team suddenly switch sides to help the losing slaves? Paarthurnax claims that Alduin's claim of godhood was false, that Alduin had strayed from the path by trying to replace Akatosh rather than just serving his function as the World-Eater. Paarthurnax, perhaps more attuned to the philosophy of the Way of the Voice, or at least the precursor to it, saw this arrogance as a fatal flaw. However, there is a more cynical, or perhaps pragmatic fan theory. Some argue that Paarthurnax's name, ambition overlord cruelty, tells the real story. He didn't switch sides out of the goodness of his heart. He switched because he saw an opportunity to overthrow his brother. With Alduin out of the way, who becomes the eldest? Who becomes the leader? Paarthurnax. By teaching the humans to kill Alduin, he effectively removed his only rival. Whether his subsequent thousands of years of meditation were genuine penance, or just a very long game of wait and see, is up to you to decide. But the fact remains. Without his betrayal, humanity was extinct. This moment of teaching is critical. Imagine the first time a human shouted. It must have been terrifying. Paarthurnax likely took the first tongues, Hakon, Gormleth and Feldir, aside in secret, hidden within the crags of the throat of the world, shielded by Kine's storms from Alduin's gaze. The training would have been brutal. Dragons learn the voice instinctively. Humans have to break their minds to fit the concepts in. There's a core in-game fact here that players experience during the main quest. When you travel back in time using the Elder Scroll to learn Dragonrend, you witness this training in action. You see the desperation. The Nords aren't fighting for territory. They are fighting to stop the apocalypse. Paarthurnax is there, landing amidst the chaos, shouting instructions. It's a chaotic, messy insurgency. It's not a formal military academy. It's a resistance cell learning how to build bombs in a basement. Only the bombs are words. The obscure lore tidbit that adds flavour here comes from the Tablets of the Dragon. Some interpretations suggest that Kine didn't just ask Paarthurnax nicely. She might have intervened directly in the winds to shield the rebels. The storms that plague the throat of the world aren't just weather, they are the lingering presence of the goddess protecting her children. The Kine's peace, shout, takes on a new meaning in this context. It wasn't just about calming bears, it was about finding a moment of silence in a world dominated by the roar of dragons, so that the Nords could hear their own thoughts. The betrayal of Paarthurnax split the dragon race. Not all dragons stayed loyal to Alduin. While the majority did, a few others might have followed Paarthurnax's lead, or at least fled the conflict. This shattered the monolithic unity of the dragon cult. Suddenly, the priests weren't just fighting peasants, they were fighting peasants who were backed by a traitorous demigod. The psychological impact on the cult must have been devastating. Their own gods were fighting each other. The absolute truth of dragon superiority was cracked. We also have to consider the risk Paarthurnax took. To a dragon, loyalty to one's nature is everything. Betraying Alduin wasn't just treason, it was almost a violation of his biological imperative. Alduin is the leader by right of power. By challenging him, Paarthurnax was rewriting his own programming. This is why he constantly asks the Dragonborn about the nature of will and destiny. He's a creature who defied his destiny, and he has spent every day since wondering if he made the right choice, or if he just delayed the inevitable end of the world. The gift also fundamentally changed Nordic culture. Before the voice, Nords were just strong warriors. After the voice, they became a culture of tonal architects. It became their identity. The tongues became the new heroes, replacing the dragon priests as the leaders of the people. But this power came with a price. As we discussed earlier, the voice tempts you to dominate. By giving the Nords the voice, Kine essentially gave them a drop of dragon blood. She made them a little bit like the enemy in order to defeat the enemy. This is a common trope in war: you become what you fight, and it set the stage for the Nords' aggressive expansion in the First Era. The community often debates whether Paarthurnax should be killed in the game. The Blades, Delphine and Esben, demand it, citing his past crimes. They argue that Hitler's lieutenant is still a war criminal even if he teaches yoga now. But the Greybeards, and most players, argue for redemption. This moral dilemma is the legacy of Kine's gift. Can a weapon of mass destruction repent? Can a being made of domination learn peace? Kine seemed to think so, or at least she thought he was useful enough to risk it. So, the board was set. On one side, Alduin, the World-Eater, with his legions of dragons and dragon priests, holding the power of the end of times. On the other side, a ragtag group of rebels, blessed by the storm goddess and trained by a traitor, armed with the very voice of creation. The first shouts of rebellion were about to ring out across the tundra, cracking the stone of the temples and signalling the beginning of the bloodiest conflict in Tamrielic history. The first tongues were ready to speak, and their first words would be a declaration of war. The rebellion had its goddess in Kine and its instructor in Paarthurnax, but it still needed its generals. It needed boots on the ground, or rather, throats on the mountain. It needed heroes who were crazy enough to look a 40-foot fire-breathing lizard in the eye and scream right back. History has given us 3 names that echo through the halls of Sovngarde: Gormleth Golden-Hilt, Hakon One-Eye, and Feldir the Old. These 3 weren't just powerful warriors, they were the archetypes of Nord resistance. If you've played the main questline of Skyrim, you have met them. You stood beside them in the Time Wound, watching the ancient past unfold through the distortions of the Elder Scroll. Seeing them in action is a core in-game fact that changes your perspective on the lore. They aren't dusty statues. They are desperate, exhausted, terrified people fighting a war they are technically losing. Let's break them down. Gormleth is the steel of the rebellion. She's the Nord ideal, fearless, clad in heavy armour, wielding a sword that has likely tasted more dragon blood than any other weapon in history. In the cutscene, she is the one eager to rush forward, the one who dismisses the danger. She represents the raw anger of humanity. She isn't interested in the philosophy of the voice. She uses it as a hammer. Hakon One-Eye is the heart. He is the leader who tries to keep the group focused. He bears the scars of the war, hence the name, and understands the cost of every battle. He represents the endurance of the Nords, the willingness to suffer for a future they might not see. And then there is Feldir the Old. He is the mind. While the others are warriors, Feldir feels more like a clever wizard or a priest who has turned his vestments into battle robes. He is the one who carries the Elder Scroll. He is the one who understands that muscle alone won't kill a god. The mastery of the Thu'um by these 3 was an anomaly. As we discussed, it takes the Greybeards decades to master a single word. These 3 mastered the shout in the middle of a genocide. This suggests that the need drove the ability. The pressure of extinction forced their souls to expand, to accommodate the tonal architecture necessary to fight back. It was battlefield evolution. But they quickly realized a terrifying truth. Standard shouts weren't enough. You can shout Yol, fire at a dragon, but he is fire. You can shout Fuss, force at him, and you might knock him over, but he'll just get back up. Dragons are immortal. They are shards of time. You cannot kill them with the weapons of the physical world. The tongues realised they needed a weapon that attacked the dragon's very nature. They needed to engineer a shout that didn't exist in the dragon vocabulary. This brings us to the most controversial and powerful creation of the Dragon War, Dragonrend. The words Azure Zarfrul, mortal, finite, temporary. This is where the lore gets deeply philosophical and incredibly dark. Dragons cannot comprehend mortality. It is a concept that does not exist in their mind. They are eternal. To a dragon, ending is a nonsense word. What Hakon, Gormleth and Feldir did was take the essence of their own suffering, the fear of death, the knowledge of aging, the fragility of human life, and weaponize it. They distilled the concept of mortality into a tonal frequency. When you hit a dragon with Dragonrend, you aren't physically binding their wings with magical ropes. You're forcing the concept of death into their mind. You're inflicting a sudden, violent existential crisis. The dragon crashes not because his wings stop working, but because his mind is reeling from the sudden, horrific understanding that he is finite. It is psychological warfare on a divine scale. You're making a god feel human, and the shock is so great that they forget how to fly. There is a fascinating debate in the community about the morality of this shout. The greybeards in the game absolutely despise it. Arngeir gets genuinely angry if you ask about it. He calls it an abomination. Why? Because it twists the voice. The voice is meant to be the language of truth, but Dragonrend is, in a way, a lie, or at least a corruption. It forces a lie onto a dragon, that he is mortal, or perhaps forces a truth he shouldn't know. It injects hatred and limitation into the Song of Creation. It is the only shout created by humans, not gods, and it carries all the bitterness of the human experience. An obscure lore tidbit suggests that creating this shout might have permanently stained the souls of the three heroes. You don't channel that much hate and despair without it leaving a mark. When you meet them in Sovngarde at the end of the game, they are glorious heroes, yes, but they are also defined entirely by this war. They are trapped in the identity of dragon slayers. They poured so much of their being into Yor-Zarfrul that they became the living embodiment of the dragon's demise. With Dragonrend in their arsenal, the dynamic of the war shifted overnight. Suddenly the dragons were vulnerable. Imagine the shock of the first dragon to be hit by it. He's flying over a battlefield, roasting soldiers, feeling invincible. Then, three humans scream a word he has never heard, a word that feels like poison in his ears. His soul convulses. He crashes. And before he can recover from the metaphysical nausea, Gormleth is there with her golden hilt to sever his neck. This was the turning point. The first tongues didn't just kill dragons, they demystified them. They showed the rest of the Nords that the gods could bleed. They broke the psychological hold of the dragon cult. If a dragon can fall out of the sky, then a dragon priest can certainly be stabbed. The rebellion exploded from a guerrilla resistance into a full-scale revolution. However, we must give credit to the sheer bravery required to use this weapon. To use Dragonrend, you have to be close. You can't snipe with it. You have to wait for the dragon to dive, stand your ground as a living flamethrower descends on you, and shout at the exact right moment. If you miss, you're ash. Hakon, Gormleth and Feldir did this over and over again. They were the tip of the spear. There is also a tragic element to their camaraderie. In the cutscene, you sense the exhaustion. They know Alduin is coming. They know that even with Dragonrend they might not win against the World-Eater himself. They are preparing to die. Feldir, with the Elder Scroll, is the contingency plan. He knows that if the swords and the shouts fail, he has to do something unthinkable. This foreshadows the rift between them. Gormleth and Hakon want to fight to the death, to win or lose on the field. Feldir is willing to break time to save the world. This trio represents the peak of ancient Nordic capability. They were the first to prove that humanity didn't need to be subservient to the Idra or the Daedra. They could take the magic of the gods, re-engineer it, and turn it back on the creators. It's a very human victory, winning through ingenuity, spite, and the refusal to accept the natural order. The legacy of the first tongues is written into the very stones of Skyrim. The etched tablets on the 7,000 steps tell their story, though often in poetic metaphors. But the reality was blood, mud, and screaming. They didn't just arise, they clawed their way out of slavery, dragging the rest of mankind with them. They forged the path that every Dragonborn walks. When you learn Dragonrend in the game, you are inheriting their specific hatred, their specific struggle. You are becoming the fourth member of their squad. But knowing the shout and winning the war are two different things. The dragons didn't just roll over, they fought back with the ferocity of cornered deities. The conflict that followed wasn't a skirmish, it was a cataclysm that reshaped the geography of the north. The Dragon War was about to enter its bloodiest phase, where the snow would turn red and the sky would turn black with the wings of the fallen. We often romanticize war in fantasy settings. We picture gleaming armies, speeches on horseback and heroic duels. But the Dragon War was not that. It was an extermination event. It was a conflict between a species that dominates the sky and a species that is stuck on the ground. The years following the invention of Dragonren were characterized by scorched earth tactics, mass famine, and casualties so high that they likely stunted the population of Skyrim for centuries. The dragons, realizing they were facing an existential threat, stopped treating the humans as unruly cattle and started treating them as an infestation. They unleashed total war. You have to understand the logistics here. Dragons are mobile artillery. A single dragon can burn 1,000 acres of farmland in an afternoon. They don't need supply lines. They don't need rest. They simply flew over the settlements of the rebel Nords and erased the food supply. The scorched earth strategy was literal. The snow of the Pale and Winterhold was covered in a layer of black ash that didn't wash away for years. This brings us to a core in-game fact that serves as a grim memorial to this era: the ruins of Forelhost. If you've played the quest, Siege on the Dragon Cult, you know the horror hidden inside. While this siege technically marked the final stand of the cult after the main war, it illustrates the sheer brutality of the conflict. The defenders, realizing they were losing to the rebels, didn't surrender. They poisoned their own water supply. They committed mass suicide rather than submit to the traitors. Walking through Forelhost, seeing the hundreds of wrapped bodies and the poison bloom in the fountains, gives you a snapshot of the fanaticism the Nords were up against. The cultists would rather die foaming at the mouth than live in a world without their dragon masters. But the rebels were equally ruthless. They developed tactics that were borderline suicidal. Since they couldn't fly, they had to bait the dragons into the valleys. They would use entire villages as lures. They would light huge signal fires waiting for a dragon to investigate, and when the beast descended to burn them, the hidden tongues would unleash the voice. It was a game of trading pawns for queens. Hundreds of brave warriors would die just to pin one dragon down long enough for a tongue to shout it out of the sky. The geography of Skyrim itself bears the scars of these battles. There is an obscure lore tidbit suggesting that the broken, jagged landscape of the Reach and the shattered plains of Whiterun might be the result of geological devastation caused by high-level Thu'um warfare. When powerful tongues and dragons clashed, they weren't just burning trees, they were shattering the rock. The earth bones were trembling. Some legends even suggest that the separation of Solstheim from the mainland, attributed to the duel between Mirak and Varlock the Jailer, happened during this general period of upheaval. The map was being redrawn by the sheer kinetic force of the shouts. We also have to talk about the psychological toll. The Nords were fighting their gods. Imagine the mental fortitude required to stab a being you were raised to worship. Every time a dragon fell, the earth shook and the Nords cheered, but there must have been a lingering fear. Are we breaking the world? And the answer was, effectively, yes. They were dismantling the divine hierarchy. This is likely why the ancient Nord heroes are revered with such intensity. They broke the psychological conditioning of an entire species. A prevalent fan theory regarding the bloodiest battles involves the giants. We see giants in Skyrim as passive herders of mammoths, but in the lore the Utmorans and giants shared a common ancestry, or at least a closer relationship. The theory suggests that the giants fought alongside the Nords in the Dragon War. Imagine that visual. A line of Nords shielded by massive club-wielding giants, batting dragons out of the air like flies. It would explain why the dragons often leave giant camps alone in the game. Perhaps they remember the strength of those clubs. It adds a layer of interspecies alliance that makes the war feel even more epic. The casualty rates were catastrophic. We aren't talking about losing 10% of the army, we are talking about losing entire bloodlines. There are no records of the population numbers, but the emptiness of the Merethic ruins suggests that these cities were once teeming with people who simply ceased to exist. The Draugr we fight today are likely the bulk of the population from that era, interred in the very temples they died defending or besieging. The war turned Skyrim into a massive graveyard. One of the most harrowing aspects of the dragon tactics was the snatch. Dragons would swoop down, grab a commander or a tongue, drop them from 1,000 feet and let gravity do the work. It was demoralizing. You can block a sword, you can't block a fall. This forced the Nords to fight in caves, in forests, under the cover of storms, which Kine happily provided. The weather became the Nords' greatest ally. Blizzards grounded the dragons, forcing them to fight on the ground, where the Nords had the advantage of numbers and steel. The climax of this bloodshed wasn't a single battle, but a slow, grinding push toward the capital. The rebels moved from the fringes, sacking temples, killing priests, and narrowing the noose around the throat of the world. Every step up that mountain was paid for in blood. The 7,000 steps are a pilgrimage route today, but back then they were a killing field. The cult threw everything they had at the advancing tongues: trolls, Paarthurnax, frantic cultists. It culminates in the realization that a conventional military victory was impossible against Alduin. You could kill the lesser dragons, you could execute the priests, but Alduin was the World-Eater. He could resurrect the fallen. The Nords were fighting a war of attrition against an enemy that had a respawn button. Every dragon they killed, Alduin could bring back with a shout. The morale hit from seeing a dragon you killed last week flying over your village again must have been devastating. This hopelessness is what drove the rebels to the desperate gamble at the throat of the world. They realized they couldn't win by killing. They had to win by removing. The scorched earth, the poisoned wells, the shattered valleys. It was all leading to one moment where they would have to break the rules of reality to stop the cycle of resurrection. The bloodiest battles had bought them time, but time was running out. Alduin was angry, and he was coming to end the rebellion personally. The war had been raging for years. The snow was red, the sky was choked with ash, and the Nords were running on adrenaline and desperation. But everything, every death, every sacrifice, every shouted curse, led to this single moment at the summit of Monavon, the throat of the world. This wasn't just a battle, it was a cosmic intervention. The rebels had realized that you cannot kill the end of time with a sword. You can't even kill him with a shout. To stop Alduin, they had to break the timeline itself. We have to set the scene. It is the highest point in Tamriel. The air is thin, biting, and charged with static magic. Paarthurnax is there, circling, nervous, knowing he's about to commit the ultimate betrayal against his eldest brother, and then Alduin arrives. He doesn't just fly in, he descends like a catastrophe. His voice booms with the confidence of a being who knows he cannot lose. Nivrarin, he calls them, cowards. To him, this resistance isn't a war. It's a tantrum by unruly slaves. The battle begins, and we witness the tragic reality of the power gap. Gormleth Goldenhilt, the fiercest warrior of her age, attacks head-on. She's the embodiment of Nord bravery. She kills 4 dragons in a day, but against the World-Eater, she is nothing. The in-game cutscene shows Alduin biting her, throwing her like a rag doll. It's quick, it's brutal. It serves as a grim reminder, bravery is not enough against a god. Hakon One-Eye fights valiantly, but he too is swept aside, his spirit broken as he watches his comrade fall. This leaves Feldir the Old. He stands alone, holding the Kell, the Elder Scroll. Now, a core in-game fact that players often overlook is the sheer insanity of what Feldir is doing. We treat Elder Scrolls as quest items or library books, but an Elder Scroll is a fragment of creation that exists outside of time. It is a piece of the raw code of the universe. To open one is to risk blindness or madness. To use one as a weapon, that is unprecedented. Feldir isn't casting a spell, he is detonating a metaphysical nuke. When Feldir reads the scroll, he isn't shooting a beam of energy. He's imposing a narrative impossibility onto Alduin. He's holding up a mirror of all possible futures and forcing the end of time to look into it. The result is a rejection. Time itself rejects Alduin. It spits him out. The lore describes this not as a teleportation, but as a casting adrift. They didn't aim him at the Fourth Era. They simply pushed him out of the now. They tore a hole in the linear flow of events and shoved the World-Eater into the gap. This created the Time Wound, or the Tid Aran. If you look at the Time Wound in the game, it's a shimmering, distorted heat haze. It is a scar on the face of Akatosh. It is a place where time is broken, where the past and the present bleed into each other. This is why Paarthurnax waits there. He has been sitting by that wound for thousands of years, waiting for the scab to rip open and his brother to fall back out. It's a vigil of penitence and terror. There is an obscure lore tidbit that suggests the use of the Elder Scroll had a backlash that affected the tongues themselves. We know they died or faded into history, but the act of banishing Alduin might have severed their connection to the webs of fate. They became unwritten in a sense, their lives defined solely by this act of negation. They saved the world by delaying the end, but in doing so they created a paradox. The end is inevitable, yet it was stopped. The universe had to hold its breath for 4,000 years. The community has debated for years. Why did Alduin emerge exactly when he did? Why 4E201? The prevailing fan theory is the prophecy of the Dragonborn. The scroll didn't just dump Alduin at a random timestamp, it dumped him at the moment when the last Dragonborn was destined to appear. The Elder Scrolls are sentient in a way. They govern fate. The scroll knew that Alduin could only be truly defeated by a Dragonborn, so it held him in stasis until the soul of the Dovah was ready to manifest on Nirn. In this view, Feldir didn't save the world, he just passed the ball to you. The immediate aftermath of the banishment must have been surreal. One moment, the apocalypse is descending, the next, silence. Alduin is gone. The sky clears. The remaining dragons, sensing their leader has vanished or fallen out of time, scatter. The psychological link is broken. The dragon priests, suddenly stripped of their god king, are vulnerable. The tide of the war instantly reverses. It goes from a desperate defense to a great hunt. However, we must acknowledge the cost of this victory. By using the Elder Scroll, the Nords introduced a flaw into the timeline. They didn't solve the problem, they procrastinated on a cosmic scale. Paarthurnax knows this. He tells the Dragonborn that they may have only delayed the inevitable. The world is meant to end, he muses. By stopping the World-Eater, did the ancient Nords deny the world its natural rebirth? Are we living in a rotting Kalpa that should have ended ages ago? This is the dark philosophical undercurrent of the main quest. You aren't saving the world, you're keeping it on life support. The banishment also changed the nature of the Thu'um among humans. After the war, Jurgen Windcaller, a powerful tongue, would later reflect on this violence. He would see the shout as something that, when used for war, leads to disaster. The use of the Elder Scroll was the ultimate act of hubris, mortals manipulating time. This led to the founding of the Greybeards and the pacifist way of the voice. They looked at the time wound and said, "Never again. We must not force our will upon the world." So Alduin was gone, cast into the currents of time, tumbling through the eras like a stone skipping across water. The Nords celebrated. They built great cities. They buried their dead. They wrote songs about Hakon and Gormla, but the dragons were not all dead. Many fled to the mountains, many hid, and the Nords knew that to secure their future, they needed to hunt down every last straggler. They needed a dedicated force of dragon slayers, and if the Nords thought they were good at killing dragons, they were about to meet a race of people from across the ocean who had turned dragon slaying into an art form. The Akaviri were coming. The banishment of Alduin at the throat of the world was the decisive blow, but it didn't end the dragon threat. It merely decapitated the leadership. The remaining dragons were scattered, leaderless, and terrified, but they were still apex predators with a divine mandate to dominate. They retreated into the high peaks, the deep forests, and the forgotten corners of Nirn. The Nords hunted them, certainly, but the Nords were exhausted. They were rebuilding a civilization from the ashes of the Merethic era. The final purge of the dragon race wouldn't come from the north. It would come from the east, carried on the sails of a fleet that didn't look like anything Tamriel had ever seen. In the late First Era, specifically 1E2703, the Akaviri arrived. These were the Saesi, the snake men of Akavir. Now, before we get into the invasion, we have to address the visual elephant in the room. In Skyrim, you wear their armour, the Blade's armour, and wield their weapons, the katanas. The ghosts you fight in Sankotor look like human skeletons, but the lore describes them as vampiric serpent men. This is one of the biggest debates in the community. Were the invaders literal snakes with arms? Were they humans who wore snake-themed armour? Or is 8 the Men of Akavir a metaphor for cultural assimilation? The fact that the ghosts in Oblivion and Skyrim appear human suggests that the Dragonguard force that landed in Tamriel was likely composed of human vassals or a human morphotype, but the mystery adds a layer of alien menace to their arrival. They didn't land in Tamriel to conquer territory for resources, they landed to hunt. In Akavir, they had already driven their own dragons to extinction, or eaten them, depending on how literal you want to take the texts. Having run out of game on their own continent, they crossed the ocean to purge Tamriel. They were the ultimate big game hunters. They marched through Morrowind and into Skyrim with a singular fanatical purpose: genocide of the Dovah. Their approach was radically different from the Nords. The Nords fought with rage and shouts. The Akaviri fought with discipline and lightning magic. They brought a military precision to dragon slaying. They didn't just rush in. They used grappling hooks, poisons, and unique tonal magic that disrupted a dragon's ability to focus. They were professional exterminators. The pivotal moment of their invasion occurred at Pale Pass in the Geralt Mountains. The Akaviri army, having cut a swath through the north, found themselves blocked by the armies of Riemann Cyrodiil, a Colovian warlord who was uniting the human lands. The stage was set for a bloodbath. But then, Riemann did something unexpected. He shouted. He wasn't just a warlord, he was Dragonborn. When the Akaviri heard the Thu'um coming from a human throat, they didn't attack. They knelt. This is the core in-game fact that defines the history of the Empire. The Akaviri were looking for a Dragonborn. Their invasion was, in part, a search for the ultimate dragon slayer, the one soul that could truly devour the dragons they hunted. They recognized Riemann not as an enemy general, but as the messianic figure their prophecies had foretold. In that instant, the invasion ended and the Dragonguard was born. They swore fealty to Riemann, becoming the nucleus of the Second Empire's military and the Emperor's personal protectors. This merger of Akaviri martial prowess and Cyrodiilic ambition created the organization we know as the Blades. But back then, they were the Dragonguard. Their primary mission remained: hunt dragons. And they were terrifyingly good at it. They built temples across the land, designed specifically as command centers for this war. Skyhaven Temple in the Reach is the prime example. When you walk into Skyhaven Temple in the game, pay attention to the architecture. It is completely alien to Skyrim. It's not Nordic stone, it's Akaviri aesthetic. The layout, the mess hall, the training grounds, it's a military bunker. And dominating the room is Alduin's wall. This bas-relief isn't just art, it's a history book and a prophecy carved in stone. It depicts the Dragon War, the banishment of Alduin, and the prophecy of the last Dragonborn. The Dragonguard knew that Alduin wasn't dead. They knew the Nords had only pressed pause. They built this temple to leave a message for the future, a dossier for the next Dragonborn to find when the World-Eater returned. There is an obscure lore tidbit found in the annals of the Dragonguard that details their methods. They utilised dragon horns, massive instruments that, when sounded, could ground a dragon or disrupt its shout. We see a smaller version of this in the game, but the Dragonguard had networks of these horns. They effectively created no-fly zones over the Empire. They also developed weapons like Dragonbane, the unique katana found in the temple, which hums with electricity specifically tuned to disrupt dragon nervous systems. These guys were tech innovators of death. The Dragonguard also introduced a cultural shift. They brought the concept of the Emperor as a divine figure protected by a samurai-esque class. The Blade's armour you wear is standard Akaviri military issue from the First Era. It is segmented, mobile, and durable, far superior to the iron and steel ringmail of the time. The katana, a sword designed for slashing speed rather than the hacking weight of a Nordic broadsword, allowed for faster strikes against a dragon's softer underbelly. They changed the meta of combat in Tamriel. However, their success was their undoing. They were so efficient that they eventually ran out of dragons to kill. By the late Second Era, dragons were effectively myths. They were rare, hidden sightings. With no monsters to fight, the Dragonguard slowly evolved into the Blades, spies and bodyguards for the Septim Emperors. They traded their dragon-slaying gear for cloaks and daggers. They became the CIA of the Empire rather than the monster hunters. This transition is tragic in a way. The Dragonguard lost their purpose. They became embroiled in politics. By the time of Skyrim, the Blades, Delphine and Esbern, are a shadow of their former glory, hunted by the Thalmor and hiding in basements. Delphine has forgotten the spiritual aspect of her order. She's paranoid and bitter. But Esbern remembers. He remembers the wall. He remembers the Akaviri origins. When he sees the blood seal at Skyhaven Temple, he is seeing the legacy of his order, a legacy of warriors who crossed an ocean to kill gods. A popular fan theory suggests that the Akaviri Tsaisi are actually immortal, or extremely long-lived, and that some of them might still be alive, hidden in the deepest vaults of the Empire or back in Akavir, waiting. The theory posits that the Potentate era, where Akaviri advisors ruled the Empire after the Reman line died out, was actually a soft takeover. They didn't conquer with swords, they conquered with bureaucracy. But regarding dragons, their job was finished. They had cleansed the sky. The Dragonguard's extermination campaign was thorough. They hunted dragons in the volcanic vents of Morrowind, the deserts of Hammerfell, and the peaks of High Rock. They drove the survivors into deep hibernation. This is why, when Alduin returns, the dragons are resurrected from burial mounds. Most didn't die of old age. They were killed and buried by the dragon cult survivors, or they hid themselves in the earth to sleep out the era of the Dragonguard. Nafal Ilagus, whom we will discuss later, was one of the few who survived by cutting a deal. But for the vast majority, the sound of an Akaviri horn was the last thing they ever heard. The irony of the Akaviri invasion is that they saved Tamriel from the dragons, only to eventually be consumed by Tamrielic politics. They laid the foundation for the empire that Tiber Septim would eventually found. Talos used the Dragonguard remnants to cement his legitimacy. If you control the Dragon Slayers, you control the narrative of power. So the skies were finally clear. The shadows of wings no longer fell across the villages. The Dragon War was officially over, and the dragon hunts had concluded. The Nords went back to fighting elves and each other. The dragons became stories, then legends, then myths. But in the great game of history, nothing stays buried forever. And while the Dragonguard had killed the bodies, the souls were still out there, lurking in the bones, waiting for the time wound to open again. But before the silence fell completely, there were a few legendary incidents. Strange, controversial moments where dragons and men intersected in ways that history still can't quite explain. One of those moments happened right in the centre of Whiterun, inside a building that is literally named Dragon's Reach. Walk into the Great Hall of Dragon's Reach in Whiterun. Ignore the Jarl slouching in his chair, ignore the court wizard talking about salts, and look up. Hanging above the throne, mounted like a prize buck in a hunter's lodge, is the skull of a dragon. It's massive, darkened by age and soot staring down at every petitioner who enters. This is Numinex, and his presence there is the reason the palace is called Dragon's Reach. But if you dig a little deeper into the history books, and specifically into the dusty basements of the Bard's College, you'll find that the story of how that skull got there is one of the biggest political scandals in Skyrim's history. The official narrative, the one taught to children and sung by court bards who want to keep their heads, is heroic. It tells of Olaf One-Eye, a first-era Jarl of Whiterun, later High King, who marched up the slopes of Mount Anthor to confront the terrorising dragon Numinex. The story claims that Olaf engaged the beast in a shout duel of epic proportions. They exchanged Thu'um for Thu'um, shattering the rocks around them, until Numinex, beaten into submission by Olaf's superior voice, surrendered. Olaf then, and this is the part that defies physics, dragged the dragon all the way back to Whiterun and imprisoned him. This feat is the reason Dragon's Reach exists. The massive stone porch at the back of the palace wasn't built for nice views of the tundra. It was engineered as a high-security containment cell for a creature the size of a bus. The heavy wooden yoke, the chains, the layout of the trap, it was all designed for Numinex. Capturing a dragon is infinitely harder than killing one. Killing just requires violence. Capturing requires engineering, bait, and a level of audacity that borders on madness. However, there is a core in-game fact that casts a long, suspicious shadow over this triumph. In the quest, Tending the Flames, you are tasked with recovering the lost verse of King Olaf's verse. You find it in Dead Men's Respite, clutching the skeletal hand of a bard named Svaknir. Svaknir didn't die of natural causes. He was executed and left to rot because he wrote the truth about Olaf. When you read the deciphered verse, or help Viamo ad-lib it, it suggests that the duel on Mount Anthor wasn't a duel at all. The verse implies that Numinex was already weakened, perhaps old or sick, or that Olaf made a deal with the dragon. Some interpretations of the bardic text suggest that Olaf might have promised Numenx safety or food in exchange for a staged capture, allowing Olaf to cement his claim as High King during the turbulent War of Succession. Imagine the scene: a young, ambitious Jarl finding an exhausted dragon and striking a bargain. You come with me, look scary, and I feed you sheep for the rest of your life. I become king, you don't get hunted by the Akaviri. It's a cynical take, but it fits the ruthless politics of Skyrim. Consider the logistics. Mount. Anthor is near Winterhold and Windhelm. Whiterun is in the centre of the province. To drag a dragon that distance, across the snowy passes, through the forests, over the rivers, without the dragon simply flying away or roasting, requires a level of compliance that is suspicious, unless Numenx was literally too weak to move, or he walked willingly. The logistical nightmare of hauling a 10-ton reptile across half of Skyrim is something the official histories conveniently gloss over. And then he brought him home does a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Lore enthusiasts often debate the deal theory. We know dragons are intelligent, they can be reasoned with. Durnevir made a deal with the Ideal Masters. Paarthurnax made a deal with Kine. It is entirely plausible that Numenx, tired of being hunted by the Dragonguard or rival dragons, accepted imprisonment as a form of retirement. He traded his freedom for a guaranteed meal plan and a roof over his head. It's less heroic conquest and more negotiated surrender. Regardless of how he got there, Numenx's life in Dragon's Reach was miserable. We know from the lore that he was bound in the Great Porch, likely with his wings pinned and his muzzle clamped, or at least threatened with heavy ballistae. He lived for years in that stone box. The psychological toll on a dragon, a creature of the sky, a shard of time meant to dominate, being chained up like a dog must have been excruciating. It is said that in his later years, Numenx went mad. He would shout incoherently, rattling the foundations of the palace. The people of Whiterun lived with the constant muffled roaring of a god slowly losing his mind just up the hill. There is an obscure lore tidbit regarding his death. Numenx didn't die in battle. He didn't die of a wound. He simply died. The accounts say he perished of loneliness, or perhaps starvation, though it's unlikely the Jarl would starve his prize trophy. It's more likely he died of a broken spirit. For a being whose existence is defined by the will to power, being rendered completely powerless is a fatal condition. His soul simply gave up. He essentially willed himself out of existence. And what about Olaf? If you enter Sovngarde at the end of the game, you can actually meet Olaf One-Eye. He's sitting in the Hall of Valor drinking mead. This complicates the fraud theory. If he was a liar and a cheat who murdered a bard to cover up a fake victory, would soon have let him across the Whalebone Bridge? Or does the Hall of Valor respect cunning as a form of strength? Perhaps in the Nord view, tricking a dragon is just as impressive as beating one up. Or maybe, despite the bard's claims, Olaf really was that strong, and Svaknir was just a bitter critic. When you fight Olaf's Draugr in Deadman's Respite, he uses the Thu'um. He is a powerful boss. He shouts unrelenting force and disarm. This proves he was a legitimate tongue. He wasn't a fake warrior. But being a tongue doesn't mean you didn't cheat. Ulfric is a tongue, and half the Empire thinks he's a murderer while the other half thinks he's a hero. The voice doesn't make you honest, it just makes you loud. The skull itself has some strange properties. It's been hanging there for thousands of years. It hasn't crumbled, it hasn't turned to dust. It serves as a passive magical anchor for the palace. Some court wizards have speculated that the lingering resentful spirit of Numenx might be what makes the Jarls of Whiterun so temperamental. The Dragon's Reach might refer to the dragon's influence reaching out from the grave to affect the minds of those who sit on the throne beneath it. It's a bit of a curse. Sit under the dead dragon, and you become stubborn, proud, and prone to outbursts. Sound like anyone we know, looking at you, Balgruuf. The Bard's Festival in Solitude, the burning of King Olaf, is a direct result of this controversy. Every year they burn an effigy of Olaf. This is a celebration of free speech and the triumph of the bard Svaknir over the tyrant king. It's fascinating that Solitude, the seat of the High King, celebrates the burning of a former High King. It shows that in Skyrim, history is a contact sport. The truth of Numenx is still being fought over in the streets centuries later, usually with mead and fire. The presence of Numenx also served a strategic purpose for Whiterun. Having a dragon, even a dead one, is a deterrent. Who wants to siege a castle that managed to capture a dragon? It gave Whiterun a reputation of impregnability. It created the legend of the city. Without Numenx, Whiterun is just a trading hub on a hill. With Numenx, it is the city of the dragon capturer. The skull is the crown jewel of the Hold's identity. There is also a tragic connection to Paarthurnax here. Paarthurnax, perched on the throat of the world just a few miles away, would have heard Numenx. He would have heard the shouts of his kin echoing up the mountain. Did he consider saving him? Did he fly down at night and hover above the clouds, listening to the rattling chains? Paarthurnax's commitment to his non-intervention vow must have been tested. To let his brother rot in a cage to protect the timeline and the humans, that is a cold, hard discipline. It reinforces the isolation of Paarthurnax. He watched the Dragon War, he watched the Akaviri purges, and he watched Numenx die in chains, all without lifting a wing, waiting for you to arrive. And finally, consider the functionality of Dragon's Reach in the modern game. When you, the Dragonborn, propose to Jarl Balgruuf that you need to trap Odaviing, he thinks you are crazy. But he agrees because the castle was built for it. The mechanism still works, the chains are still oiled, the trap is still viable. This means that for thousands of years, the Jarls of Whiterun have been maintaining a dragon trap just in case. That is unparalleled pessimism or preparedness. They knew deep down that the dragons weren't gone forever. They kept the gun loaded and the safety off for 4 eras. So when you stand on that porch and summon Odaviing, you are reenacting the legend of Olaf. You're stepping into the boots of the One-Eyed King. But hopefully, unlike him, you aren't lying about it. You call the dragon, you trap the dragon, and you look him in the eye. Numenx's story is a warning. You can capture a dragon, but you can't break its nature. And while Numenx died a prisoner, he is remembered. His name is spoken every time someone asks about the palace. In a way, he achieved immortality. He is the eternal guest of the Jarl, watching the court intrigues unfold with hollow bone sockets. But Numenx wasn't the only dragon to interact with humans after the war. While he was rotting in a cell, others were out in the world, making moves, cutting deals, and finding ways to survive the Great Hunt. Some hid in volcanoes, others hid in plain sight, wearing the livery of the Empire. The story of the dragon mercenaries is one of the strangest chapters in Tamrielic history, and it centres on a dragon who decided that if you can't beat the humans, you might as well get on their payroll. While Numenx was rotting in the dungeons of Whiterun, a few of his brethren were out in the world, proving that survival of the fittest sometimes means survival of the most employable. We tend to think of dragons as monolithic monsters who would rather die than bow to a mortal. And for 99% of them, that's true. But there is always that one guy in the office who is willing to switch teams if the bonus package is good enough. In the history of Tamriel, that dragon was Nafaelilagus. If you've only played Skyrim, you might not know this name, but if you're a veteran of the franchise, specifically the spin-off game The Elder Scrolls Adventures, Redguard or The Elder Scrolls Online, you know him well. Nafaelilagus, or Nafalar as he was known in the Second Era, is the ultimate opportunist. He looked at the Akaviri Dragonguard, he looked at the dead bodies of his kin, and he made a calculation. I can be a dead god, or I can be a rich mercenary. He chose the gold. This dragon's resume is wild. In the Second Era, during the events of ESO, he allied with the Dragonguard, the very people sworn to kill his kind, to defeat a rival dragon, Latvulon. He realised that the enemy of my enemy is my useful idiot. But his most famous gig came later, when he signed on with Tiber Septim himself. Imagine the propaganda value. Tiber Septim, the man who would become Talos, didn't just have a Dragonborn's voice, he had a literal dragon on his payroll. Nafaelilagus served as the jewel of the imperial crown. He was a living weapon of mass destruction used to terrify the enemies of the Empire. The deal was simple. Tiber Septim gave him protection from the Blades, who were technically supposed to kill him, and allowed him to keep the loot from his conquests. Nafaelilagus was effectively a privateer. He burned fleets, sacked cities, and then slept on a pile of gold in the Strosmakai treasury. This relationship shatters the idea that dragons are mindless beasts of the apocalypse. It shows they understand economics. Nafaelilagus understood that the Fourth Empire was the rising power, and he bought stock early. However, his loyalty was purely transactional. In Redguard, he is eventually killed by Cyrus the Restless. a Redguard hero who basically pulls a David and Goliath by heating his sword in dragonfire and stabbing Nephal-Elagus in the mouth. It was an undignified end for a sellsword, but honestly, he lived thousands of years longer than the idealists who fought to the death in the Merethic era. There is a fascinating debate in the lore community regarding Nephal-Elagus' soul. Since Cyrus wasn't Dragonborn, he couldn't absorb the soul. So, theoretically, Nephal-Elagus is still out there. His bones might be on Stros M'Kai, but his soul is hovering, waiting. Did Alduin resurrect him? Is he flying around Hammerfell right now? The thought of a mercenary dragon waking up in the Fourth Era and looking for a new contract is a terrifying and hilarious possibility. Maybe he's currently negotiating with the East Empire Company. On the other side of the survival spectrum, we have Mimulnir. If Nephal-Elagus was the loud, flashy mercenary, Mimulnir was the master of stealth. He is the first dragon you fight in Skyrim, the one who attacks the Western Watchtower. Most players treat him as a tutorial boss, a loot pinata to unlock the first shout. But lore-wise, Mimulnir is a legend. Mimulnir is listed in the Atlas of Dragons as one of the few confirmed survivors of the Dragon War. The Blades knew he was alive. They tracked him for centuries. The texts say he was last seen in the Reach in the Second Era. And then, he vanished. For over 1,000 years, Mimulnir went dark. He didn't burn villages. He didn't demand tribute. He simply ceased to exist on the map. This implies a level of discipline that is uncharacteristic for a dragon. Remember, they have a biological urge to dominate. For Mimulnir to hide in a cave or sleep beneath the ice for a millennium without flying out to roast a sheep requires immense willpower. He suppressed his very nature to survive the Dragonguard purges. He was the ultimate sleeper cell. His return at the Western Watchtower is tragic if you pay attention to his dialogue. He isn't just roaring, he is speaking. When he sees the Dragonborn absorb his soul, his final words are Dovah keen? No. There is genuine shock in his voice. He survived the Dragon War. He survived the Akaviri. He survived the Blades. He waited patiently for Alduin's return. He finally comes out of hiding to celebrate the resurrection of his leader, and the first thing he runs into is the one being in the universe who can permanently kill him. It's cosmic bad luck. He survived history only to trip at the finish line. There is a core in-game fact here that many miss. Mimulnir didn't come out of a burial mound. Alduin didn't resurrect him. Mimulnir was alive the whole time. He likely heard Alduin's return at Helgen, felt the resonance of the time wound opening, and flew out of his hiding spot to join the party. This confirms that there are dragons who have been physically present on Nirn this entire time, just watching, waiting, and likely laughing at us from the clouds. We also have to mention the Twin Secrets fan theory. Some lore scholars speculate that dragons might have the ability to polymorph, or take human shape, similar to how they do in Dungeons & Dragons or Warcraft. While Skyrim shows no evidence of this, the lore of the Syashi, snake men, and their obsession with eating dragons to become them, leads some to wonder if the dragons in hiding weren't in caves, but in palaces. Could a dragon use high-level illusion magic to pass as a mortal battle mage? It would explain how some evaded detection for so long. Nephal-Elagus worked openly, but maybe others worked secretly. It's a stretch, but in a world of magic, hiding in plain sight is a valid strategy. Then there are the dragons of the Forgotten Vale. In the Dawnguard DLC you encounter Naslarum and Voslarum, two dragons who live under a frozen lake. They can dive into the water and burst out through the ice. This is a unique behaviour. Most dragons stick to the sky. These two adapted to an aquatic environment to guard the word wall there. It shows that dragons can adapt to their biomes. They aren't just mountain creatures, they are apex predators who can dominate any environment, ice, water or volcanic ash. The survival of these few dragons, Nephal-Elagus, Mimulnir, the Vale Twins, and of course Paarthurnax, kept the species from total extinction. They were the embers in the ash, but they were isolated. They had no leader. Nephal-Elagus was a sellsword, Paarthurnax was a monk, Mimulnir was a hermit. They weren't a threat to the world order, just local hazards or political tools. But the stasis couldn't last forever. The turning of the Kalpa is a wheel that never stops rolling. The prophecy on Alduin's wall was ticking down. The brilliance of the dragon break at the throat of the world was that it cast Alduin out of time, but gravity, cosmic gravity, eventually pulls everything back down. In the Fourth Era, year 201, the civil war in Skyrim was raging. Ulfric Stormcloak had shouted the High King to death. The Brothers of the North were killing each other. The land was soaked in blood, the perfect offering for a death god. And at the border crossing of Helgen, a small cart was carrying a horse thief, a rebel leader, and a nobody who had tried to cross the border at the wrong time. They were heading to the block. The executioner raised his axe, and then a sound was heard. A sound that hadn't been heard in 4,000 years. It wasn't thunder, it was a shout. The time wound had finally reopened. The pause button had been released, and Alduin the World-Eater was back to finish what he started. The headsman's axe was hovering in the air. The crowd was silent. The priestess of Arche was droning on about the 8 divines, and then the mountains roared. It wasn't a landslide, it wasn't a storm, it was a sound that tore through the sky like canvas ripping. When Alduin burst from the clouds above Helgen, he didn't just interrupt an execution, he interrupted the Fourth Era. We need to appreciate the precision of this moment. For 4,000 years, since the moment Feldir the Old read the Elder Scroll at the Time Wound, Alduin had been cast adrift in the currents of time. To him, no time had passed. He was fighting Gormleth and Hakon one second, and the next, he was tumbling out of a rift in the sky above the throat of the world in 4E201. He was confused, likely disoriented, and absolutely furious. He looked down, saw a world that had forgotten him, saw a town full of your mortals, and decided to make a statement. Alduin's appearance is distinct. He isn't just a generic dragon. In the game files and visual design, he is described as having a meteor-like quality. His scales are jagged, volcanic rock. His eyes burn with a red intensity that differs from the standard orange or blue of lesser dragons. He's spiky, armoured, and radiates an aura of decay. When he uses the Shout-Yoltor Shul at Helgen, it isn't just fire, it's an inferno that shatters stone. He snaps the tower like a twig. This is the World-Eater warming up. But the most terrifying thing Alduin does isn't burning Helgen. It is what he does immediately after. He ignores the fleeing civilians, mostly, and heads for the burial mounds. He has a mission. He needs an army. And he has a shout that breaks the laws of life and death. Slen Tid Vo. This shout is the core mechanic of the Dragon Crisis. It translates to Flesh Time Undo, or Flesh Time Reverse. This is a crucial distinction from necromancy. Manimarco, or a standard necromancer, reanimates a corpse by shoving a minor Daedric spirit or enslaved soul into dead meat, puppeting it around. The body is still rotting, it's just moving. Alduin's shout is tonal architecture applied to biology. He's speaking to the dragon's bones and telling them, it is not now, it is then. He reverses the timeline of the corpse. If you watch the resurrection sequence in the game, specifically at the mound near Kynesgrove, you see this happen in real time. The dirt blasts away. The skeletal remains of the dragon, which have been sitting there for centuries, begin to glow. The bone knits together, then the muscles weave themselves out of thin air, followed by the scales. It is a reversal of entropy. Alduin is restoring the dragon to the physical prime it enjoyed before it died, and because the dragon's soul is immortal and has been lingering near the bones, as we discussed earlier, the soul snaps back into the vessel the moment the vessel is viable. It's not a zombie, it is a full resurrection. There is a core in-game fact that ties into this: the Dragon Stone. Early in the game, Farengar's Secret Fire asks you to retrieve this tablet from Bleak Falls Barrow. Most players just view it as a fetch quest item, but if you look at the texture of the stone, it is a map of Skyrim with stars marking specific locations. These stars correspond exactly to the dragon burial mounds. The dragon cult left a GPS map for their master. They knew he would return, and they left him a list of where they buried the bodies. Alduin isn't flying randomly, he is following the map. He's going from mound to mound, waking up his lieutenants. This leads to a massive fan theory and community debate. Why did Alduin attack Helgen? Was it just random proximity to the time wound? Or did he sense the Dragonborn? Some lore theorists argue that dragons can sense the soul signature of another dragon. Alduin might have popped out of the time wound, felt a powerful dragon soul nearby, you, and attacked Helgen to nip the threat in the bud. The irony, of course, is that by attacking Helgen, he saved the Dragonborn from the headsman's block. He created his own destroyer. Another theory suggests he was there for Ulfric. The war feeds Alduin. As the World-Eater, he grows stronger on the souls of the dead. A civil war is an all-you-can-eat buffet for him. If Ulfric had been executed, the war might have ended, and the flow of souls to Sovngarde would have dried up. By disrupting the execution, Alduin ensured the chaos would continue, feeding him the power he needed to regain his full strength. It's a 4D chess move. Save the rebel leader to keep the harvest of souls going. We also have to discuss the weakened Alduin theory. Players often complain that the final boss fight with Alduin is too easy, or that he doesn't feel like a World-Eater. The lore explanation is that Alduin is not acting in accordance with his sphere. He is trying to rule the world, not eat it. By deviating from his divine purpose, ending the Kalpa, he has lost his divine invulnerability. He is acting like a normal, albeit powerful Dragon King. This hubris makes him vulnerable. If he had simply opened his mouth and started eating reality, we probably couldn't have stopped him. But because he wanted to play politics and rebuild his cult, he brought himself down to a level where he could be punched. There is an obscure lore tidbit regarding the resurrection process found in the Atlas of Dragons. Not all dragons can be resurrected. If the bones are scattered or destroyed, Slentid Vo might not work. This explains why the dragon cult built those mounds so deep and sturdy. They were protecting the hardware for the eventual reboot. It also implies that the Dragonguard who hunted dragons might have tried to burn or crush the bones to prevent this, but the cultists were likely hiding the bodies faster than the Akaviri could destroy them. The resurrection shout also has terrifying implications for the Nords. They spent thousands of years building farms on top of these mounds. Imagine being a farmer in Rorikstead, tilling the soil, and suddenly the hill in your backyard explodes and a dragon crawls out. The psychological horror of the return is that the enemy was literally under their feet the whole time. The land itself is birthing monsters. Alduin's behaviour during these resurrections is also telling. He speaks to the resurrected dragons. Sahloknir, Zilgro Dovah Ulse, Sahloknir. Your spirit is bound by dragon eternity. He is asserting his dominance immediately. He isn't just waking them up, he is conscripting them. Get up, we have a war to finish. The dragons, confused and likely disoriented from centuries of death sleep, fall in line because Alduin is the alpha. It's an instant reinstatement of the hierarchy. However, Alduin made a critical error at Helgen. In the smoke and fire amidst the screaming Imperial soldiers and the confused Stormcloaks, one prisoner slipped away. He didn't chase the prisoner down. He was too focused on the destruction, or perhaps he deemed a single jaw insignificant. But that prisoner carried the soul of a dragon. By letting the last Dragonborn escape, Alduin initiated the prophecy that would destroy him. The mechanism of his return also triggered the return of the magical ecosystem. The Towers theory in Elder Scrolls lore suggests that when the Towers, metaphysical anchors of reality, are deactivated, magic changes. The return of the World-Eater seems to have reactivated the magical potency of the land. Dragons are beings of pure magic. Their presence leaks magicka into the atmosphere. This might explain why mages feel a surge in power, or why ancient wards in dungeons suddenly activate. The world is waking up because the nightmare is back. So, Alduin is loose. He's flying across Skyrim, shouting at piles of dirt and pulling an army of immortals out of the ground. The Jarls are panicked. The Empire is confused. The Blades are coming out of hiding. But the only thing that matters is the cycle of souls. Alduin can resurrect dragons because their souls are eternal. But there is one loophole in this immortality. There is one way to delete a dragon permanently, to ensure that Slentid Vo has nothing to grab onto. And that power lies within the chest of the prisoner who just ran out of Helgen Keep. The war is no longer about armies, it is about who can eat the most souls. We have established that dragons are biological impossibilities and metaphysical constants. You can stab them, burn them, or drop a mountain on them, and they don't truly end. Their bodies break, but their souls, their animus, linger, tethered to the bones waiting for Alduin to hit the reset button. This makes the war against them futile for any normal mortal. You are fighting a hydra that heals itself. But the universe, in its tendency toward balance, or perhaps cruelty, created a predator for the predator. It created the Dovah. The term Dragonborn is thrown around casually in Skyrim, usually by guards commenting on your shouting, but the metaphysical implication of the title is terrifying. To be Dragonborn is to have the body of a mortal and the soul of a dragon. You are a walking contradiction. You are a shard of Akatosh stuffed into a fragile fleshy shell. But because your soul is dragon-natured, you possess the same urge to dominate. And more importantly, you possess the ability to consume. This is the central mechanic of the entire conflict, the absorption of the dragon soul. When you defeat Mirmilnir at the Western Watchtower and the energy streams into you, leaving just a skeleton, you aren't just leveling up. You are eating him. You are devouring his very identity. In the Draconic tongue, there is no distinction between conquering and debating and consuming. By defeating the dragon in combat, your soul proves it is stronger. It asserts a greater truth. And because the lesser dragon soul recognizes this superiority, it is absorbed into the greater whole. This is the only form of permanent death for a dragon. It is total erasure. When a dragonborn absorbs a soul, that dragon is gone from the cycle of time. Alduin cannot resurrect Mirmilnir because there is no Mirmilnir left. He's part of you now. You're a graveyard of immortal spirits. This is why the Greybeards are so reverent and fearful when they confirm your identity. They know you're a walking extinction event for the children of the Time God. This process also explains the instant mastery of shouts. As we discussed, a normal human like Ulfric or a Greybeard spends years meditating on a single word to understand its tonal meaning. But dragons understand the words instinctively because they are the words. When you absorb a dragon's soul, you aren't just taking his life force, you are downloading his knowledge. You absorb his understanding of fire or force. You bypass the decades of study because you literally digest the experience of a being who has known that word for thousands of years. It's the ultimate shortcut. A core in-game fact that highlights the significance of this is the reaction of the Whiterun guards after that first fight. They are stunned. They mention the old legends immediately. Whatever it was, you killed it. They recognize instinctively that what they just saw, the flesh burning away, the transfer of energy, wasn't normal magic. It was a holy or unholy transaction. It legitimizes the player not as a hero, but as a mythical figure returned. But let's look at the obscure lore implications found in the Book of the Dragonborn. The text suggests that the Dragonborn is a blessing of Akatosh. But why would Akatosh create a weapon to kill his own children? This touches on the schizophrenic god theory we mentioned earlier. Akatosh is the god of time and order. Dragons, particularly under Alduin, had become agents of chaos and domination, disrupting the natural order. The Dragonborn is Akatosh's immune system. You are the white blood cell sent to eat the infection. It's a divine autoimmune response. There is a disturbing fan theory known as the soul stacking, or Gestalt soul theory. If the Dragonborn absorbs the souls and knowledge of dragons, does he also absorb their personalities? By the end of the game, you have eaten dozens, maybe hundreds of dragons. The theory suggests that the Dragonborn isn't a single person anymore, but a hive mind of conquered wills screaming inside a human head. This might explain the protagonist's silent, stoic nature in the game. You're too busy holding back 100 dragon egos to engage in small talk. It also adds a layer of horror to your character. Are you still the prisoner who woke up on the cart, or are you just a vessel for a legion of dead dragons wearing a human suit? We see this dynamic mirrored in Miraak, the first Dragonborn. When you meet him in the Dragonborn DLC, he steals your dragon souls. He shouts, "Ze lost die du," your soul is mine to devour. He understands the game. He has been trapped in Apocrypha for thousands of years, hoarding souls, likely planning to eat enough of them to become a god himself. The final battle between the last Dragonborn and Miraak is essentially a cannibalistic duel. The winner eats the loser and takes everything they have collected. It's a winner-take-all metaphysical poker game. The fear this strikes into the dragon population cannot be overstated. Dragons are arrogant. They fear nothing, except the Dovah. You are the boogeyman of their species. In the game, you hear dragons shout, "Dovah, no!" when they realize who you are. They know that if they lose to you, there is no coming back. There is no waiting in the burial mound. It is the void. This fear disrupts their hierarchy. Alduin claims to be the alpha, but you are the predator that eats alphas. This unique relationship to the soul, also explains the dragon blood that is required to open the Skyhaven Temple blood seal. The Akaviri knew this mechanic. They knew that only a being with a dragon soul could serve as the ultimate emperor. This is why the Riemann and Septim dynasties were so obsessed with lineage. It wasn't just about divine right to rule, it was about divine capacity to hold the barrier. The Amulet of Kings held the souls of the Dragonborn emperors, a giant soul gem of dragon souls. When Martin Septim shattered it in oblivion, he released that collective power to banish Dagon. It all circles back to the potency of the soul. However, there is a tragedy to the Dragonborn's existence. You're effectively killing your brothers. Paarthurnax touches on this kinship. He calls you Dovah. He recognizes you as one of them. Every kill is a fratricide. The war isn't man versus beast, it is dragon versus dragon, with one dragon simply being smaller and lacking wings. The mechanics of the soul absorption are visually represented by the shimmer. When a dragon dies near you, the air distorts. This is the breakdown of the dragon's physical form as the ethereal tether snaps. The energy flows into you. In the lore, this is likely an intensely overwhelmed experience. You're being injected with raw power. It's probably addictive. This leads to the idea that the Dragonborn could become a tyrant just like the dragons. The more you eat, the more you want to dominate. Is the hero of Skyrim just the next villain in the making? So, the stage is set for the final confrontation. You have eaten the lieutenants. You have absorbed the wisdom of the ancients. You have learned Dragonrend, the shout of mortality. You have broken the cycle of resurrection by becoming the grave. Alduin knows you are coming. He knows that his army is being depleted not by death, but by digestion. He retreats to the only place where he thinks he's safe, the place where he feeds on the souls of the dead. He goes to Sovngarde, and you, the ultimate hunter, must do the one thing no living mortal is supposed to do. You must follow him into the afterlife. To end a war against a god, you cannot simply win on the battlefield. You have to follow the enemy to his sanctuary. In the case of Alduin, that sanctuary is the afterlife itself. The final chapter of the Dragon Crisis doesn't take place on the snow-covered peaks of Tamriel, but in the ethereal realm of Sovngarde. This is the ultimate transgression. Mortals are not meant to walk in the Hall of Valor until they have died with a sword in their hand. But the Dragonborn, driven by the necessity of the prophecy, breaks this rule, stepping through the portal at Skuldun, guarded by the priest Nakreen, and entering the spirit world alive. The atmosphere of Sovngarde is distinct. It is not the fire and brimstone of the Deadlands, nor the alien geometry of Apocrypha. It is a place of profound, aching beauty. The sky is a tapestry of nebulae and constellations, the whale totem dominating the heavens. The air is thick with the songs of the ancestors, but when you arrive, the song is muffled. There is a heaviness here. The valley is choked with a thick magical mist. This isn't weather, it is Alduin's hunger made manifest. We have to talk about the horror of this mist. We think of Alduin as the World-Eater, and we assume that means he physically bites the planet. But in Sovngarde, we see the literal mechanism of his title. He's eating the souls of the dead. This is the soul snare. Imagine the tragedy of a Nord warrior. You fight your whole life, you die bravely in battle, you expect to drink mead with Ysgramor, and instead, you get lost in the fog just outside the gates, wandering blindly until a black shadow swoops down and devours your very essence. It is a violation of the cosmic contract. Alduin isn't just killing people, he's erasing their afterlife. He is denying them their eternal reward to fuel his own power. Navigating this mist, you encounter lost souls, stormcloaks, imperials, perhaps even High King Torrig. They are confused, terrified. They are the spectral cattle waiting for the slaughter. This creates a sense of urgency that transcends the political squabbles of the living world. It doesn't matter if you are a rebel or a legionnaire. In the mist, you are just food. When you finally reach the Whalebone Bridge, you meet Sun, the Shield Thane of Shore. This encounter is a core in-game fact that confirms the ancient Atmaran pantheon. Sun was the bear god, the brother of Stuhn. He tests you, not to stop you, but to see if you are worthy of entering the hall. He is the bouncer of heaven. And once inside the Hall of Valor, the scope of the moment hits you. You are standing among the legends. Ysgramor is there. Jurgen Windcaller is there. Olaf One-Eye is there. It is a fan service convention of the greatest heroes in Nord history, all drinking and waiting. But 3 heroes are not drinking, they are waiting for you. Gormleth Golden Hilt, Hakon One Eye, and Feldir the Old. The original tongues. The band is getting back, together for one last gig. This narrative symmetry is perfect. The three heroes who failed to kill Alduin in the Merethic era have been waiting thousands of years for the fourth member of their squad, the Dragonborn, to finish the job. They couldn't do it alone because they lacked the dragon aspect. You provide the final piece of the puzzle. The four of you march out of the hall. This is the climax of the prophecy. You stand at the edge of the mist, and here the battle begins not with swords, but with the voice. You must shout Lokvakur, clear skies. This is symbolic. You're shouting away the fear, the confusion, and the obscurity. You're forcing the truth of the sky to reveal the monster hiding in it. Alduin shouts the mist back. It is a tug-of-war of reality. It is foggy! No, it is clear. I say it is foggy. I say the sun is shining. It is the ultimate tonal debate. When the mist finally clears, Alduin descends. He is angry, but there is a hint of desperation now. He is cornered. He has no more minions, no more burial mounds, no more places to hide. It is 4 ants against a beetle, but the ants have needles. The combat mechanics here are significant. You must use Dragon Rend. The shout that Hakon and Gormleth invented, the shout that forces mortality onto the divine, is the only thing that can ground him. You're hitting him with the collective trauma of the human race. The fight in Sovngarde feels different. Alduin is at his peak power here, fed by the souls of the dead, but he is also in a realm where belief shapes reality. The heroes are fighting with the strength of their legends, and you are fighting with the strength of a prophecy fulfilled. When Alduin's health bar finally depletes, something strange happens. He doesn't fall over and become a ragdoll. He writhes. He screams in a language that might be the raw code of the universe breaking down. And then he explodes, but not like a normal dragon. There is no skeleton left behind. There is no lootable corpse. He bursts into a black tar-like sludge that evaporates into the ether, and most importantly, and this is the subject of endless debate, you do not absorb his soul. Why? Why doesn't the Dragonborn eat the World-Eater? The leading theory, supported by Arngir's dialogue if you return to High Hrothgar, is that Alduin was not killed in the mortal sense. He was reclaimed. He is a shard of Akatosh. Akatosh simply took the piece back. The end of time function was recalled to the factory because it was malfunctioning. Alduin isn't gone forever. He's just removed from this Kalpa. He will return at the true end of the world to eat it properly, as he was designed to do, without the ego and the domination complex. You didn't destroy the apocalypse, you just reset the clock. The victory is melancholic. The mist clears permanently. The souls of Sovngarde cheer. You have saved heaven, but you cannot stay. You are still living. Sun teaches you one final shout, call of valor, allowing you to summon the heroes to Nirn, cementing the bond between the living and the dead. And then he shouts you home. Returning to the throat of the world is a jarring transition. You go from the golden light of Sovngarde to the cold, grey wind of the mountain. The dragons are there waiting, Paarthurnax is there, but they don't attack. They mourn. They acknowledge the melancholy of the fall. Alduin Malan. Alduin is fallen. Even though he was a tyrant, he was their brother. He was the eldest. There is a sense of loss in the victory. The age of the dragons is truly over. The last remnant of their divine hierarchy has been dissolved. Paarthurnax takes flight, rallying the remaining dragons. He vows to teach them the way of the voice, to teach them to overcome their nature. It is a hopeful, perhaps naive ending. Can a race of dominators learn pacifism? That is a question for the next era. But for now, the skies are safe. The prophecy of the Dragonborn is fulfilled. The wheel turns, the Kalpa continues, and the prisoner who started in a cart at Helgen stands at the summit of the world, the master of the Thu'um, the slayer of the World-Eater. The war that began in the dawn of time when the snows of Skyrim were first stained with blood is finally quiet. The masks are silent, the mounds are empty, the song is ended. And so, the echo of the last shout fades into the wind. The mountains of Skyrim, which have seen so much fire and fury, settle back into their ancient stony slumber. The dragons that remain are no longer monsters to be feared, but shadows gliding high above the clouds, drifting away into the legends of tomorrow. The threat that loomed over the world, the shadow of the Black Wing, has been dissolved by the light of the morning sun. Take a deep breath now. Can you feel that? It's the stillness of a world that is no longer holding its breath. The tension is gone. The battles are history. The swords are sheathed. All those heroes, Hakon, Gormlath, Feldir, are back in the warm glow of the hall, raising a cup to the peace you helped secure. They are resting, and now you can rest too. The sky is clear. The stars are watching, just as they watch the first Nords, just as they watch the dragons, unchanging and calm. You're safe here, tucked away from the cold winds of the high peaks. The fire is warm, the door is barred, and the story is told. Let the weight of the armor drop from your shoulders. Let the noise of the world drift away like the mist over the throat of the world. There is nothing left to fight tonight, just the quiet hum of the universe spinning slowly, safe and sound. Close your eyes. Let the darkness wrap around you like a soft fur cloak. The journey is over. The dragon sleeps. And now, so should you. Sweet dreams.